Okay, everybody, we're working on our mock-up radial engine here, and you can see the crankcase I cut from the balsa quarter-inch stock, this stuff, and we just took 2 squares of that, cut it into the 9-sided shape that you see here. After gluing it together this way, cut it out, sanded each of the facets, and we cut 9 sections of dowel off of this rod. No, not this rod. This rod, which is what is this rod? This rod is 3/8. So 3/8 dowel rod. And we wrap the bottom edge with tape to simulate the crankcase footing, the flange that it bolts to the crankcase with, simulated. And we wrap them with thread to simulate the cooling fins. And now I'm capping them with tape here. And as you can see, when this fits onto the cowling, and again, this cowling is going to be trimmed. Where's my top mark? There it is. This is the top dead center. So you see how that, I'm going to get that situated to where all things are more or less equal, right about there. And when we flip the cowling onto it, you can see the ends of the cylinders are not going to be visible. So then you ask, well, why am I wrapping them with tape? Well, it's a couple of reasons. One is to hold the thread, cap it, even though it's super glued along the back here. You don't want to put glue all the way around, because then it fills the thread, and then it doesn't look like cooling fins anymore. It just looks like solid dowel. So anyway, wrapped with thread, capped with tape. And then we'll be cutting this material up. This is the same stuff I used for the harness, for the plug wire harness. This same stuff I'll be using. Actually, I'll probably be using the Q-tip sticks. I'll be cutting up the Q-tips again, because that's a better diameter. This is too fine. Let me get one of these out. Alright. So Q-tips, again, they're 2 cents a dozen maybe. Just slice off the ends, and then you can see that's probably a better diameter for the push rod. Right? 2 per cylinder, 1 on each side, valve actuator, push rods, whatever you want to call them. We'll be cutting those out of the Q-tip material, and then we'll install the plug wiring, and we should have a decent looking representation of a radial engine. Right? So as far as the fascia goes, the crankcase itself, or the crankcase bell, I did that the same way I do the wheel covers. Did the wheel covers for the P40, and on the most recent project on the Skyhawk, we did the wheel covers by making circles out of the birch ply material. So we cut this. We did 2 diameters. We did 1 diameter for the actual fascia, and that was, I believe, this one. This one. 1.25 inches. Then we did 1 3/8 diameter for the back plate, and the back plate you can sort of see here behind the wiring harness, and that's this piece of back plate right here. So that one was the larger one. It went on first, centered on the face of our faceted piece, and then we made our crankcase fascia by attaching a piece of our 1/4 inch, the same material as I made the crankcase out of. Attached that to the front, and then sanded it around until we had a nice dome shape. Get that dome shape on there, and it creates the crankcase fascia, or the bell, call it anything you want. And then that was centered onto the back plate, and then the wiring harness, evergreen plastic dowel extrusion went around the circumference, capped with a piece of larger diameter tubing from evergreen. When I buy this stuff, I check the fit in the store. It's one of the things that you really can't do online. I mean, if you're really good with diameters and measurements, maybe you can figure it out, but for me, I have to go to the store. I might have to open a package or two just to check it and make sure we've got fit. We've got that one will slip inside the other, and that's usually for use as machine gun parts or sights or landing gear struts. If you want to simulate a shock absorber, even on small vehicles, trucks and boats and that kind of thing, a little hydraulic actuator arm you can simulate with this material. It just has to fit nicely in there. So the best way for me to do that is to test fit it. That's why I'm hoping hobby shops don't go away. It'd be hard to do that just using the internet. Okay, so anyways, all that being said, this is our rudimentary basic engine. As I say, I'll be wrapping each of the cylinder heads with tape. I might put a small circle of balsa on top that overhangs at the front, just something to attach those push rods to, right? I'm going to attach the push rods to something, and looking at this now, I'm not too sure how that's going to look at the top of the crankcase. Might have to do a little more fabricating around the outside of this. Anyway, push rods will be attached, and to have something to attach them to at the top end in addition to the bottom end is always helpful. So maybe a larger diameter, just a round piece at the top. I don't have to simulate the valves and rockers at the top. There's no need for all of that. None of that will be visible behind this. All right. And this is going to stand off from the engine just enough for those push rods to be installed. Actually, all that'll be installed before the cowling goes together, but you know what I mean. So there will be a standoff here, which will make that look even more clever. Passable. Barely acceptable. But anyway, so you see where I'm going. You know, that may or may not be necessary. Typically, it's good to have something to fasten them to on both ends, so they're not breaking loose and wiggling around in there. Okay, I think push rods definitely have to be installed. This engine had a Pratt & Whitney, I'm sorry, yeah, it had a Wasp engine. So it'll have to have the push rods on it. But then we'll install the plug wires, we'll get everything else done, and again, yeah, there'll probably have to be caps up here, and they could be any shape I want them to be, round or square or even V-shaped, you know, to simulate the footprint of the valve cover. Those of you who know what I mean, you know what I mean. So anyway, that's where we're headed on this. We're off to a start. That's all I wanted to do was get this for now, and get back to the infill on the fuselage. We still need to finish that off. I just want to see where I was going to go with the engine, and you can see this will fit just fine in here. Fits kind of perfectly behind as far as the diameter goes there, and looks good behind the cowling, so I'm more than satisfied so far with what I've got here. We'll layer on a few coats of sand and seal and just lather that on there, being careful not to get any on the thread, just onto the crankcase proper, and that's after I get everything taped at the tops. Alright, so that'll be it. I'll just tape these off and then we'll be done with that for now, and I can get back to infill, and then when it's time for the cowling to go together and we start thinking about the engine, then I can finish it off and get all that detailing done. So this was a nice break from infill. As you can see, that's kind of how I like to operate, is just not do any one task all the way through to completion, but you know, have a way to step back and do something different if something becomes tedious, or if there becomes a question about how to proceed on something else, or anything like that that might stall you. Way to keep pushing forward is to just come up with another aspect of the build that needs to be done at some point, and just work on it for a minute. And sometimes as you're working on something like this, in the back of your mind you're mulling over whatever your problem or situation is, and then maybe a solution will present itself. It's more likely to do it then than if you're just getting frustrated and banging your head against the problem. Right, anyway, that's and that works no matter what you're doing. I think, you know, a lot of this stuff when I talk about, I'm modeling, and that's what I'm talking about, but it's real world stuff too. If you're at a job and you're dealing with multiple problems simultaneously, or there's tasks and deadlines that are conflicting, sometimes breaking away and taking care of a thing that you know is certain, that has to be done, and there is time on it, or walking away and just walking around the block for a minute, those kinds of things can really be helpful, more so than you might think, and that others are willing to accept. It's actually you know, that one step back to take two steps forward. Sometimes you have to take that step back in order to get rolling, and that's kind of what I did here, and I wanted to talk about that anyway. So, all right, thanks for watching. Have a good day.